Welcome to the HReSource podcast, a series designed specifically for business owners and executives who want to better understand people to increase productivity and performance. Hi, and welcome to the latest episode of the HReSource podcast. In today's episode, we're going to be meeting Alastair Thomson. Alastair is somebody I've known for a number of years and I have huge respect for. He's a bit of a triple threat. And I say triple threat on the basis of the fact that he's a law graduate, a qualified accountant, and he's very tall. I think he comes in around 6'5". So I'm quite glad for the video recording of this, we're sitting down. He is an extremely experienced businessman. He has operated within manufacturing sector, the B2B sector, utilities and financial services at the very highest levels at the C-suite as CEO and CFO. During those assignments, which he is in great demand for, he has been able to double turnover in less than 3 years. There's a lot more to Alastair, which we'll learn about through the podcast, but the focus is going to be on his books. He's written a couple, actually. One we're going to dive into a little bit deeper, but his first one was Cash Flow Surge, where it was really looking at the benefits you can gain from being in better control of your cash flow. We may well touch on that one, but his latest book, How to Build a Better Business Plan, is one book I think we should all take note of. How many of us really got business plans? How many of us are really happy with what we've created through our business plan, if we even have one at all? And do we know how to really present it if we're looking for funding and finance? All those answers and more, hopefully we will get to. So please hang on in there and join me shortly because I'm going to be meeting Alastair Thomson. Thank you. Alastair Thomson, welcome to the HReSource podcast. It's delighted to see you.
Well, good to see you, David.
And this, I did actually mention in my intro that you're a bit of a triple threat. And that triple threat takes the guise of being the law graduate, qualified accountant, and very, very tall. Well, I'm quite glad that at the moment we're looking, actually I might be a bit taller. So sitting down doing a Zoom is actually fantastic. This means nothing to people on the podcast, of course, who are listening to this, trying to imagine what that looks like. Well, Alastair, you come in at what, 6'5"?
6'5", yeah. So I'm not tall enough for the NBA, but I'm taller than most.
Yeah, and the other conversation we've had actually before this podcast was about the fact that you made a bit of a personal joke at your own accent because, of course, you're Scottish, and remarkably, I had to remind myself going through the people who've been on the podcast, you're number 5 from that great nation.
Yeah, well, we get about. I think it's fair to say, there's, we're not shy to come forward. So
I must be attracted to the Scots. Maybe I am one myself somewhere back in the day. My grandfather always said he thought that we were from Scotland, but I think he once looked at the map and saw Lauder and thought, I'm not sure there's anything beyond that, really. Alastair, brilliant to have you on board. You and I have known each other now for quite some time. We've exchanged business opportunities. We've talked. We've had very interesting social events, which I'd love to get back to in the very near future, where we can go out and have a bite of lunch.
Wouldn't we all? Wouldn't we all?
I'm alive. Can't wait. Today, I'd like to talk to you, obviously, about yourself, but have a look at a subject which I think we really don't talk about enough. And I know from being in business and running organizations for any period of time, you can become complacent. So either if you are starting up or whether you have been doing it for a number of years, a business plan for me is something that should be central to what you're trying to achieve in any given year. So I'm a fan, I'm on board, but I think you're somebody that a lot of the listeners will want to hear from a very structural perspective, because I've read the book, which gives great insight and structure for people who are starting out, or even I would suggest people like myself who might think, well, I know how to do that. Well, actually, maybe you don't. Maybe there are some things that you've missed out. But before we get into all of that, I'd like to know a little bit more about Alastair prior to being the author, prior to being the business owner, prior to the C-suite. How did your career take shape?
Yeah, well, as you rightly say, David, I started out in the law, as it were. I did a law degree. I'm not a qualified solicitor. I've never practiced law, but at the time I was graduating from university in my hometown, the fair city of Glasgow. There just weren't opportunities for for people to take articles, as it was called at the time, maybe called something slightly more, slightly less Dickensian rather now, but there was just not the opportunity. And the one thing which I had during the course of doing my law degree, to my surprise, is probably as much as anybody else, but I turned out to have a real gift for tax law. So I in all my tax law classes, I did really, really well. I was top of the class at university. So I thought, well, I'm not getting a job as a solicitor. I'm clearly good at tax law, even though I don't quite understand why. I know I'll go off and become an accountant. And at the time, accountants were hiring, but lawyers weren't. So I went along to that, and as they say, the rest is history. Ironically, I've actually never practiced tax. I mean,
after all that,
after of course, I work out what 19% of the profit is and tell people that's the tax they have to pay. But beyond that, I've never actually practiced in the tax department, despite apparently having an aptitude for it. So
acing it in the exams,
one of life's ironies. But I really like the problem. So it was a puzzle, and I really liked the puzzle. It was a problem-solving puzzle. Left to your own devices, you pay out 100 grand in tax.
And how did the problem-solving Alastair sort of migrate from being the accountant through into being, there's a flair of entrepreneurism in there somewhere? How did that manifest?
Well, I think it's a range of different things, but I think also you get to the point where, I mean, I was very lucky. I worked for some great companies when I was younger, and I progressed my career very quickly. So, I was a finance director by the time I was 30. I was an MD by the time I was 35. And there comes a point when you think, so the next 30 years of my career is just all doing the same stuff, is it? And I think a lot of people feel the need after a while to go off and explore other avenues rather than keep reinventing the wheel. That old thing about someone with 20 years service might just have had 1 year service 20 times over, rather than having 20 years of continual growth and learning. And I think maybe that's the bits in my nature, but I find it very, very hard to do the same thing, day in, day out for years on end. I know some people love it, but it's not quite me.
I call it getting bored easily, and that was me. And I look back on my career and I think about, which is a bit odd because I seem to have stayed in areas or roles. I think it was 10 years at Thomas Cook, 13 years part-time with a law firm as CEO. But I think what kept the interest is actually lots of things happening. There was a very dynamic periods. Some of them probably you could have done without them being dynamic, because there were things like recessions, and now we've got things like pandemics. But with the pandemic, how has that affected you in your current roles?
Well, it's been quite interesting because, across my range of clients, I've got some who have never done better. And I should say they're not in the PPE market or anything like that. They're just normal businesses.
Not a VIP list, then. Not a VIP list.
Sadly not. But some have never done better. They, by and large, of course, they were good businesses anyway, but they've just kept going through this. Other businesses have been, severely hampered, particularly those who rely on lots of foot traffic or lots of event type activity where you just can't get people together. That's been very, very difficult for them. And then, there's a range somewhere in the middle who, it could be better, but it could be a lot worse as well. And, we're doing okay and we're holding our heads above water. So it's a bit of a spread, but I think that's probably true for everybody.
You've got a couple of, probably more than a couple, but there's a couple of businesses that you are directly associated with and have a senior position with in developing your own business, which is the Better Business Company and consultancy, and the FD Centre. Just explore those a little bit more, just explain what they are to the listeners.
Well, if I do the second one first, the FD Centre is the country's and by many measures even the world's largest provider of part-time finance directors for growing businesses. And that's where I kind of keep a toe in my financial background, if you like, and allows me to do some interesting things for a range of growing entrepreneurial businesses. So that's great, and that keeps me fresh and interested, and it makes sure that I've got the finger in the pulse, perhaps is the best way of putting it, in terms of the economy and business challenges and so on.
Yeah.
What I've started doing as well more recently, though, is to be looking to grow what I do in terms of writing and publishing and producing information of one sort or another. So it's a very different thing. And it's much more a model of helping people to understand how they can do things for themselves, rather than have someone like me as an outsider to come and do it for them.
Yeah.
Because again, it's a different way of looking at things, and I quite like that. I quite like that kind of multiple perspective thing, because what I find is that a lot of things, and business planning is a good example of one of those things. It sounds a bit mysterious. It sounds, I don't want to go anywhere near that. That's for people with spreadsheets and complicated formulas and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And actually, I think there's a lot to be said for kind of demystifying it, because one of the challenges that businesses have is sometimes it's not overcomplicating it. It's actually making it simple. They get lost in the complication of the process, and that's not the point. The point is to do something simple that gets a good answer, not to do something really complicated that actually doesn't quite work, although it sounds very impressive.
So the Better Business Company, it sounds, it's a coaching, mentoring approach to client work, where you're actually hoping to pass on knowledge and advice and guidance, which people can take away, applying within their business, and then have learned that knowledge and can continue to grow. So that's
yes. And as I say, the key thing, it's I've got this thing about let's try and make it so that people can understand what's going on and get a perspective on it they probably don't have just now. Most of the people in any sort of business have not prepared a business plan. Very often, actually, it's the finance director who prepares a business plan, but that's because there's a very common misperception that business plans are all about numbers. So they go, numbers, that's the finance director. And I would argue that actually numbers comes right at the end of the process. And if you do your business plan right, actually the numbers aren't the hardest part of the process; they're the easiest part of the process.
That's true, because actually, having read the book, here we go. For those who've got the YouTube channel,
snap.
we can hold up our books. I'm holding it in my hand for those that are listening to the podcast.
For those of you listening in black and white, it's the purple book next to the blue one.
Oh, who remembers their snooker? So the shocker for me, which you just explained it beautifully, was the fact that, hang on, this is Alastair talking. The finance bit's right at the end, which is, I thought was, but yeah, that it's presentation, and we will get to that. I did promise you, and I think it's a perfect time for you just to perhaps explain how those that are listening to the podcast might be able to get a hold of you, Alastair.
Surely. I mean, the number one place you're likely to find me hanging out is on Twitter, because I spend far too much time there.
I can vouch for that, listeners. And very entertaining is too.
Yes, but you can find me there at Finance DIR CFO. So it's short for Finance Director, but Finance DIR CFO. That's the best place to get me. You've already been kind enough to mention the website, which is thebetterbusinesscompany.com. Either of those two places are good places to find me. Excellent.
And actually, there are a couple of links within the book which provide additional guides. So that's definitely a website worth checking out. So now to this new book, How to Build a Better Business Plan, which already presupposes that somebody might have one, which is quite interesting. So who would you say is the target audience for this?
I think it's predominantly people who perhaps they want to understand the business plan just intellectually, but it's really people who have been rather mystified by the way that this whole thing has been developed into some hugely complicated, hugely involved, hugely technical process, when actually it's nothing of the sort. And as you said in your opening remarks there, David, it's something that actually every business owner can do, should do. And what I find is when people do it, they either do it because they kind of feel they have to. The bank said, I need a copy of your business plan. So they're going, oh, heavens, all right, I'd better do a business plan.
It's a task then, isn't it?
Yeah, and they kind of fling something together. Or they may be going for external funding, might be from a family member, might be from a VC, might be from crowdfunding, might be whatever, but somebody is saying, look, we need a business plan. I think, oh, I want to get them to invest. So I've really got to have this really all singing, all dancing, really sexy, souped up sort of business plan document.
Yeah.
And neither of those tend to end in good results is my experience. So I think really it's for people who are looking to run their business effectively and efficiently, who are not necessarily looking for external funding, although they may well be, but really it's about for people who want to focus their efforts and be really clear about what they are going to do, how they're going to do it, and also what the potential is for their business, because a business plan done well should be unlocking potential in your business. It shouldn't just be a case of fling some numbers together on a spreadsheet and send it off to the bank.
And you're quite correct in the view that the business planning process can form part of a to-do list born out of even I have seen certain professional indemnity insurance companies requiring it of the insured to show that they've actually got an organized business, or it becomes part of a compliance process as part of a statutory body saying, if you want this mark, you need to demonstrate you've got a business plan. And so it becomes this, right, okay, that's another thing on my list I have to go and try and do. Whereas, yes, you can do that, but clearly, and I think the message that comes through strongly in the book is this is a strategic opportunity to be able to step back from the day-to-day and have a look at how the business is operating. So it's easier if you're doing that and it's a brand new business, but nevertheless still the discipline to work through. Harder, I think, if you've been in a business for a number of years and you've made a number of assumptions and it just does the thing it does because it does it, and you're not actually taking time to stop and think, is this right now? And I think right now, in the situation we find ourselves, hopefully towards the end of this pandemic and emerging out of it, is a pretty good time to be thinking about where you are going, because things have changed.
Yeah, and to me, that's the other great advantage of doing a business plan and making it part of your regular cycle as a business, to sit down at least once a year and have a look at this stuff. Because even if there wasn't a pandemic on, in 12 months, the world changes, and the world's changing faster and faster and faster. And, so many businesses have a model in their minds, which at some point clearly worked. They don't run that model because it didn't work. They run it because it did work. The question is, does it still work? Not, did it used to work? Because they nearly all used to work.
Yeah.
And that is where, sometimes people's optimism is perhaps misplaced, or often I find people haven't really done their research, so that, the classic is, well, look, we've grown by 5% a year for the last 20 years, so we'll grow 5% next year. Well, you might, but equally, you might shrink by 20. Or actually, there is maybe the potential for you to double your business, but you're just coasting along at 5%, and you're not really thinking about, hang on a minute, is this big new opportunity opened up here for us? We could go for that. And if you want to go along at 5% a year, that's fine. You're the business owner, you get to make the choice. That's perfectly okay. But wouldn't you at least like to know there was the opportunity to double your business? You can know about the opportunity and then decide not to do it. That's okay.
Yeah.
But wouldn't you like to know? Wouldn't that make potentially a difference to how you saw your business and how you ran your business? Yeah. Well, I think it would. I would rather know, even if I decided not to do it, because then at least I would have been through the thinking process, I'd have calibrated the option, and I would have made a decision one way or the other.
Yeah, otherwise it's still in the dark. And on the actual practicalities of a business planner, I guess I'm getting to here. There's a lot of onus on, depending on the size of the business, depending on the nature of the business as well, to a certain extent. Who would it be, do you think, that should be involved in the process?
Well, I think it's something that the business owner should be doing largely themselves, not without help from other people. That's okay, but they have to drive the process, and that's one of the challenges I find with, the finance director looks after that. That to me is a bit of an abdication of responsibility.
Yeah,
I mean, that's nothing against the finance director.
no, I get exactly what you're saying.
But actually, they're not driving the business. You are driving the business as the MD. You're either driving it because you're driving it, or you're not driving it by default, if you like, because you're letting somebody else drive it. But so you're setting the tone one way or the other. But if you're the business owner, you really need to be driving the business. And I think this is also important because, again, we're all fallible. I'm fallible, you're fallible, we're all fallible. But sometimes business owners can get things in their head which actually are factually incorrect. And again, the number of businesses I've seen who are working really, really hard to achieve some objective when that objective is in fact impossible. And lots of time and money and effort and tears and wailing and gnashing of teeth goes into this. And you perhaps come along partway through and go, look, guys, this doesn't matter how much you try, it's just not going to happen. And I remember a few years ago, I was working with a business, and it was kind of month 11 of their financial year, and they had this big new initiative, big new project, really prestigious, really public thing. But month 11 of the financial year, they'd done about 25% of the business they had to do for their annual target. And I said, it's not looking very likely, is it? And they said, oh no, the chief executive has told us this is going to happen. I was going, did they? did they really? And based on what information? Well, we're not entirely sure, but the chief executive said it's going to happen. And I was thinking, I don't think I'd be betting the company on that.
No, his name wasn't Kevin Costner, was it? There is the line from one of my favorite films about the Field of Dreams thing about build it and they will come, which I completely get. Do you want to just expand on that with the context of the book? Yeah,
I mean, as you say, it's a line from the film Field of Dreams with Kevin Costner, but it's the idea that you can open up a business, you can have a new idea, you can do something, and then magically people will turn up to buy it. And there was a time when that was true, in the early days of the consumer society. If you didn't have a washing machine at all, actually a pretty third-rate washing machine, you'd have no trouble selling that. Now there's 300 varieties of washing machines. We've all got more washing machines than we need.
Yeah.
And actually it's a very different sort of thing. You can't just say, hey guys, I got a washing machine, come and buy it, because probably people won't. And this is one of the things which, again, is in many businesses, people forget about the customer perspective. There's lots of talk about, customers are our most important asset, and we're here to serve our customers. Services are main priority, all that sort of thing. But actually, if you look at it from the customer perspective, you'd say, well, how many washing machines is the average person going to have in their house? And the answer is probably not greater than one.
Yeah.
So if that's the case, then you need to do something different. You need to do something to get them to buy your washing machine, not just go, ta-da, there's a washing machine.
Yeah, exactly. And what can you tell me about half-inch holes?
Well, I think it's another. If I don't mean to correct you, David, quarter-inch holes actually, but
okay.
But you're on the right lines. You're on the right lines.
That's my memory. Sorry, I'm the age I've got to now. Yeah, it's the principle, isn't it? It's the principle of what you're talking about there.
It is absolutely the principle, because I think businesses sometimes forget they're there to solve a problem. They're fundamentally, somebody comes to spend money with you because they've got a problem they want to solve. Either that's to take away a problem, an issue they've got now, or they want to get something in the future that they don't currently have.
Yeah.
One way or another, you're solving a problem. And it was explained to me once, and I really like the analogy that, if somebody comes into your hardware store and wants to buy a 1/4-inch drill, they don't actually want a 1/4-inch drill. What they want is a 1/4-inch hole.
Yeah.
It's just right now, the way you get a 1/4-inch hole is to get a 1/4-inch drill. But at some point in the future, maybe you'll do that with a laser. Maybe Apple will build it into all their iPhones. I mean, who knows? Who knows what's going to happen? But the danger is, if you think, well, we're in the 1/4-inch drill business, the minute somebody invents a better way of getting a 1/4-inch hole in a piece of wood, you're out of business.
Yeah.
And this was the thing that always struck me about the railroad companies in America. They're roll the clock back to the late 1800s. They were the predominant form of transportation in the United States, and now they transport a tiny proportion of the number of people that go all sorts of different ways. But they forgot that they were not in the railroad business. I mean, that happened to be what they did. What they were actually in the business of is moving people great distances across a continent.
Yeah. I mean,
and that was their kind of 1/4-inch hole, 1/4-inch drill thing. If they'd thought about, we're in the people moving business, they'd still be around today, but they'd be flying people instead of taking them on trains.
Exactly. I mean, history is littered, isn't it, with businesses that have lost their way a little bit and or lost their way entirely. And this isn't necessarily a great example, but Kodak found themselves in a similar spot, thinking, I think, that they were the bee's knees as far as photographic reproduction was concerned, only for technology to overstep them rather quickly and find that most people were now doing this digitally. And that was a chance to have to try and very quickly reinvent themselves in computer printers and other devices, and have struggled.
Yeah, and I think, as you rightly say, throughout corporate history, there's a litany of these things. But I think the number one thing that lies at the base of all of them is people have taken their eye off the customer.
Yeah,
they've become inwardly focused. They've thought about themselves. We're in the railroad business, or we're in the producing the best quality, silver-based photographic film known to mankind. Well, the minute you think that, then if a different way comes along of you taking an image or getting across a continent, you're sunk.
Yeah.
If your focus is on customers want images of their children and their family and their special occasions, how do we go about doing that? That's a very different question. And that's why part of the process going through the business planning book is to get you to really think about what is it you're doing for your customers. Because in the early days of this, if there's a little bit of a mismatch, well, you can get back on track again. Or if your customers are starting to drift off, you can follow them.
Yeah.
You can make sure you're staying as close as possible and still serving those needs, even if it's not quite what you used to do. But if you don't, the danger is that you'll wake up one morning, as with Kodak, as with the railroads, as with countless other businesses, and discover you just don't have any customers anymore, and then you're stuffed.
And in taking us through this process with the book, can you perhaps just give the listener a bit of an outline as to chapter structure and the thinking behind the structure you produce? We sort of touched on it a bit with where finance features, but perhaps give us a bit more of a broader outline.
Yes, well, what I tried to do was I tried to make this a step-by-step process, and actually with the book you can also get you can download some forms and things that allow you to construct a business plan. It tells you the question. It tells you the questions you need to ask. It tells you what you need to do at every stage in the process. But it's been quite deliberately structured to be a step-by-step process for someone that's filling in their own business plan. So it's broken down into sections, like we have an executive summary. We talk about your company background. We talk about the products you sell. We talk about your sales and marketing. We talk about your finance, all those sorts of things. And we do that sort of quite deliberately, because what we're trying to construct here is we're trying to construct, and I know both you and I have time working with the legal profession, David, and
Absolutely.
what we're trying to do, I sometimes describe it as being, we're trying to come up with something that's a little bit like something you may need to later rely on in court.
Go on, that's the one.
So what you're trying to do is, of course, fundamentally it's a selling document, because you're wanting to convince people that you've got a good plan for the future, and so you shouldn't be ashamed about that. But you've also got to say, well, but based on what? What evidence is there? And to be clear about, look, in this area, I've got a lot of really, really specific evidence, and I can demonstrate that. In this area, we don't have that. Maybe it's a new product or a new service or a completely new business. We don't know for sure. But what our hypothesis is, we think X, Y, and Z, and if X, Y, and Z come to fruition, and we believe they will for these reasons, then we think we could build in a revenue line of this, or a customer base of that, or a geographical spread of whatever, and that's how we're going to establish the viability of our business.
Yeah. And would you advocate getting external support if it's a element of an unknown, getting some verified, qualified research to sort of back that data up?
Yeah, and sometimes, I mean, as I said a few months ago, the business owner, in my view, should be leading this, but it doesn't mean they have to do it all themselves.
Yeah.
And so some information, for example, it might be quicker and easier to get somebody outside the business to do it. There are times when you want someone who's got maybe a professional accreditation to do it for a very good reason. So, if you are wanting to tell bankers about the quality of your intellectual property, for example, well, I would be wanting someone with a lot of impressive legal qualifications to be signing off something that proved that I wasn't making this up. And that's what I mean about it's evidence you may later rely on in court. If somebody QC says, look, this intellectual property is absolutely copper bottomed, then to all intents and purposes, it's absolutely copper bottomed. And you're cutting off that debate, because what people who are investing or funding your business in some ways are going to be thinking about is, is it real? Am I going to get my money back? Am I going to get the payouts I'm looking for? Now, if somebody QC says this is copper bottomed intellectual property, okay, I don't need to ask any more questions about that, because whatever I know about it's a lot less than a QC is going to know about it. So you're trying to kind of answer the questions, anticipate the questions, and then provide an answer that then means the debate can stop at that point. We're not arguing about this particular QC's expertise versus some other QC's expertise. Nobody's having a debate at that level of detail. But what you're able to say is, when I say our intellectual property is solid, I mean it, and I can prove it, and here's the evidence.
And also the moving on to the sort of credibility factor, which is again a big point that you make in the book. You need to be able to demonstrate that this is a business with legs, obviously from the point of view of the product, what it's delivering, and the fact that there is evidential proof that it works. It's not a dud. But that's also backed up by another section where you talk about the people in the business and the qualifications those people bring. And I think as an example that you quote, which is of somebody that has been at the top of the tree of a particular business for a sector for quite some time and has decided to then venture out and do it for themselves, which is a classic example of Southern California, where you might get that happening very often with the way in which a lot of tech businesses of Silicon Valley businesses have grown. So that might be an easy one to do, but for others it might not be quite so easy to tell. So how do people really, how the business owner best present their business, if you like? I mean, of course, this depends on how large they are and the scope of it. But do they need to present the CVs of individuals or an organization chart of some sort to demonstrate that?
Yes, it depends what you're doing, and it depends how critical these people are, because sometimes you don't need to make a song and dance about this. our finance director is a qualified accountant, you know, member of the Institute of Chartered Accountants. I don't need to know anymore. Right, you've got a decent finance director, that's fine. You know, there are some areas where it might matter a lot more. So, you know, if you were an IT software business that was going to, you know, create enterprise solutions for cloud computing or something, then I would be looking for really quite a lot of persuasion that the person that you are putting forward as your technical genius really was that person. You know, it might even be you as the founder, as a business owner, or it might be a third party. But whoever it is, I'm looking for a lot of collateral, because it's an area that maybe I don't understand as well as I might. It's an area where actually there aren't well-established parameters already. They're not, you know, you want a finance director, hire a qualified accountant, you know, that's simple. You want somebody to develop your cloud computing solutions for enterprise, you know, where do you go for one of those? You have to construct a case. And I think what it's all about really is, although it's a bit indirect, it goes back to, again, where we started this conversation about, you know, I started out doing the law, and one of the classes I particularly remember in that, and it's been really helpful ever since, actually. We did a third year class on the law of evidence. You know, this is how you present evidence in court, and different calibers and qualities of evidence and so on. And I was nerdily fascinated by it, probably a lot more than I should have been, but I really enjoyed this class.
Nothing wrong with a bit of nerdly interest in something. So it's actually more about, I think it's the ability to be able to delve into something deep enough to understand it, to know it, and put it into context and apply it in further other circumstances. So
yes, no, that's absolutely right. But it's yeah, but it's exactly that sort of principle that says, you know, if you say something in this document, can you prove it? And if you can't prove it, what collateral can you give to me that is inclined to make me believe that you're not completely making it up? You know, and like I say, sometimes that's a little bit of something. You know, if I put so and so and so and so FCA finance director, people go, qualified accountant finance director, no problems, all sorted. You know, but there are other things where, you know, what is the market size for enterprise value cloud solutions in the course of the next decade? Well, I don't know. You don't know. Probably the person I'm giving my business plan to doesn't know either. So I've got to make a persuasive case that the answer is whatever the answer is. It's well-founded, it's well-evidenced, and whilst nothing is guaranteed, it is the best evidence that anybody has at this point in time, which is you know, actionable. And you know, there are some funders who wouldn't like that as a risk type. They wouldn't be interested in it. But assuming you're dealing with someone who is interested in that sort of proposition, you're really just giving them the collateral that allows them to go, I understand the methodology, I understand the thinking, I understand it's not guaranteed, but I feel that's a good number. It's a number that we can work with as being realistic and achievable. And that's what you're trying to get people doing. You're trying to get people to say, look, this is the best we can give, perhaps, but it's solid. It's as solid as anything's going to be, and therefore you can place some reliance on it.
Thinking back to in the days of which I created business plans, and I'm rethinking the way I do business plans reading your book, but I think one of the successes that I may have had was in creating, this is when I worked as CEO for a law firm, I created a one-page summation. It was like the edited highlights of the business plan that was portable in its communication across the business, because as far as I was concerned, everybody who worked in that business should understand what they're working towards. They don't need to know every single bit and bob of detail, but these are the broad headline features of what we're doing this year. And I've mentioned that to a few people and they just sort of scratch their heads. I don't think it's that difficult to do. I think actually that not only, and I found that it was helpful to share that to the wider audience, and I think it did help to motivate and garner support for what the business is doing. But also it helped me to remember what it is we were working towards and have that a memo all the time nagging at me to say, right, okay, we need to hit these marks, we need to hit these marks. And for me, that's why business planning is something that it's not so much the chore in the business. It's something that we should be doing. We need to get into the habit. We need to get into the rhythm of doing it as part of a natural progression. Whenever the financial year comes around, we're planning ahead of time. We're always thinking about it. We're checking in regularly with either quarterly or monthly meetings to think how we're doing against progress. All of those things. But one of the difficulties, long-winded way of getting around to sort of mention this comment, or this question, I think the tone of my business plan, therefore, had a bit more of an internal. We weren't looking for funding. We weren't looking for investment. I guess there may be an occasion where there were conversations with the bank over overdrafts, whatever, and with your insurers to know whether, this particular policy, do you have a business plan? Yes, tick, or whatever. They weren't so much bothered about the tone of voice. But for an investment, that does require a tone of voice, doesn't it? Especially if you've got, let's say, very technical. You talked about cloud service. You talk about a technical software prospect as an example. If they're not tuned into that industry, you've got to work quite hard, haven't you, to sort of explain it. How do you marry? I mean, it's quite a detailed question. How would you answer that if a business owner was to say to you, I've got a very technical product, I'm looking for investment, how do I find my tone of voice? How do I phrase this?
Yeah, I mean, I think first of all, actually, it's true for almost any business. I mean, even if it's not a really technical business, because whoever you're approaching for funding, and like I say, it could be a family member. It's not necessarily a financial institution or what have you. But probably they will not be spending all day in that sector. No matter what you do, if I knew someone who was a hairdresser, well, I'm not a hairdresser. I don't spend my time hairdressing. So if I was going to invest in a hairdressing business, I would want someone to say, look, this is how the hairdressing business works. This is how my business operates within it. Here's the things that we do to make sure that we're going to hit these revenue numbers. We're going to hit that profit number. So it doesn't need to be a hugely complicated, high technology business. It's just because it's a business I'm not used to working in, I need somebody to explain it to me. And I think the sort of approach that I would tend to use is to say that, you've got to work on the basis that you're dealing with people who don't understand your business. Those who do will quickly scan through it and they'll get to the bits they want to read, or they'll maybe, partway through they'll go, oh, that's interesting. I hadn't seen that before anywhere. I'll file that away for future reference. So people who know all about your business, they'll just skim through it. It doesn't really matter. But you're really writing it on the basis of, I've got to persuade someone who knows nothing about this business at all. What's actually even worse sometimes is people who maybe think they know a bit about the business, but actually don't. It's like, those people that go and see the GP having looked up on Google first to go, well, I've got this rash, doctor, and I think it's probably such and such a disease. You think actually it'd be better if you didn't look it up on Google, to be honest, because you probably haven't got the right answer. So now I've got to talk you out of the wrong answer, and then I've got to diagnose you for the right answer. But the tone of voice really is, you want to present a positive image of your business. You want to present the image of somebody who knows what the levers are in their business. What levers are they pulling? What difference is it going to make? And someone who is very grounded in who they are and what they do. Because that's the way that you get confidence as an external party, that you're dealing with someone who, none of us are perfect. We've all got our foibles. Nothing is guaranteed. But you're dealing with someone you've got the best chance of getting the results out the other end that they're telling you they're going to get. So it is just talking that through. And it's almost what I call, talking through from first principles. Don't assume they know the business. Don't assume that they know you. Don't assume they know exactly how you operate. Don't assume they know who your competitors are. Don't assume that they know why people buy from you. People leap to all sorts of assumptions about, oh, well, obviously they buy this from you because X, Y, and Z. Well, actually, no, that's not why at all. It's an entirely different reason. And if you can talk people through that, first of all, as you go through it, you're demonstrating your own credibility. Every time that you complete a section and somebody can read it and go, right, I know exactly what that's about. I understand it completely. I've got all the evidence I need to believe that. Every section you do with that, they'll, after 2 or 3 of those, they'll go, oh, this person really knows the stuff, don't they? You know, there's, and you're building your own credibility as part of that because of the way you've approached explaining that to a third party. And that's a little bit the way I've actually tried to do it in the book, to be honest. You know, I've tried to explain this to somebody who knows nothing about writing business plans. And, you know, and as I said, you know, it's the idea where if you've got a step-by-step process that takes you through and you can fill in every one of those boxes, then you're going to have a pretty decent business plan. But it's that not making assumptions. It's not assuming you know the answer, and it's not assuming the person that you talk to will understand any of those things. And then you'll probably pitch it about right.
And that's great. I mean, in getting the tone of voice is spot on. It's the way to communicate your message as clear as possible. But also there's a danger, I guess, potentially of oversharing. I'm just wondering in a point of thinking about, if you're really passionate about your business, you're an entrepreneur, you're wanting to get investment from a new start, do you share the fact that you're looking for a 5-year exit, 3-year exit, if you're just purely sending this out for investment? Do they need to know that there is a game plan here?
I think that's always helpful, if for no other reason than that will rule some people out.
Yeah.
You know, so if you're saying, well, look, I want out in 3 years, and you're trying to get someone who really looks at a 10-year horizon, they're going to go, that's really interesting, thanks very much, but it's not for us. And I think that's one of the things that, you know, a business plan, it's a little bit like a selling process. You know, you have to have that alignment between yourself and your customer. If you think of it in a sales environment, in a business plan environment, you have to think about alignment between what you want and what your funder's going to want. And it's not that those things are right or wrong, good or bad. It's just not everybody suits everybody. You know, people have got like, you know, some sectors banks won't fund. Some sectors, you know, if you go to the VCs, they'll go, look, we're just not investing in the whatever sector at the moment. It doesn't need to be any rhyme or reason for it. It just happens that that's the decision they've taken. And you can complain about it as much as you want, but the fact of the matter is that they're not going to invest in you. So you might as well find that out early on and spend your energies with people who are actually prepared to fund you.
And there's always a danger as well, I suppose, of making it all about the individual, the entrepreneur setting it up, because ultimately there's a danger and there's a risk. There's a good section on risk, which is covered at the end as well, which I'm completely 100% with, because that's quite often something gets left out. People will avoid, whether you're a pessimist or an optimist. I think you do tend to try and want to avoid. It's a bit like nobody wants to take out insurance because, you know, some of the compulsory stuff they'll bother with, when actually they could really do reviewing their risks as a whole. One other area that is a question mark is potentially the political environment. I mean, back in the day when I did my studies, the pest, political, economic, social, technological, you know, the wider world, the environment out there, to set the scene. Does that form part of the executive summary, or is that elsewhere?
Yeah, yes. I mean, I'm not in the book. I don't particularly approach it in that way. So, you know, you've got pest and you've got PESTLE and you've got SWOT and you've got all those other kind of acronyms, and I think they serve a purpose. The danger is that when you see that sort of model, they can be a bit tick boxy. They can be, you know, and I find them.
To put it into context, Alice, to sort of interrupt you, but just so it helps. I mean, I was thinking very much about pandemic.
Yep.
You know, if it's a business that has been impacted or can benefit from, or there's certainly something that can have a positive or negative impact through the pandemic, or people might have question marks about that, or something like Brexit. We're looking at the politically. So those are the things I had in mind as events that perhaps might be worth outing.
Yeah, definitely. And just to sort of briefly sort of finish on that, you know, all the things that you would find in a SWOT or a PEST or a PESTLE are actually in the book. They're just not in the book with that label on them. So we go through the process, but without having that sort of slightly tick boxy approach. Your question though is absolutely spot on, because of course all sorts of things can happen to businesses, and it's one of the things that troubled me a bit in the early days of the talk about the pandemic, because people were going, oh, nobody could possibly have foreseen, you know, some virus from somewhere that, you know, shut the economy or whatever. And I would say, well, yeah, okay, you know, I grant you nobody could have foreseen specifically that, but actually, does something happen every N years, regardless, which really serves to spook the world economy, to prevent international travel, to do any, yeah, it happens actually remarkably regularly. And you know, there was some sort of you know, situations like I remember reading about universities who were going, oh, you know, 15% of our students come from China. So if students don't come from China to our universities, then the university sector is going to be bankrupt. And I'm going, hang on a minute. Are you trying to tell me that your financial modeling has not allowed for a potential 15% drop in student numbers for any sort of reason? You know, it could be some scandal because your vice chancellor has been up to something they shouldn't have been. You know, it could be that, you know, the train that used to go to your town doesn't go there anymore, so people need a car if they're coming there. There's 101 reasons why your student numbers might drop by 15%. And you're really telling me you've never planned for that? You don't have any, you've never thought that was a possibility. So I would say, you know, people are coming up with excuses like that. That was a complete dereliction of duty, because you should be thinking about that sort of thing. You don't need to know it was a pandemic that did it. It might have been the train stopped running to your town, but the fact of the matter is stuff happens. And I think people, particularly when they look at risk analyses, they get very excited about, oh, can we identify the risk of, you know, a jumbo jet landing in our factory? Can we identify the risk of the river that's 4 miles away flooding and it putting out the electrics? Can we identify? I would say, well, you know, you can spend a lot of time doing this. I'm not sure it helps very much. Every now and again, your business is going to get disrupted for factors outside your control. The bit you should be doing your risk analysis on is, if we couldn't be in our office for 3 months, what would we do?
Yeah.
That's a worthwhile bit of risk analysis. The reason behind you not being in the office for 3 months, I think that matters a lot less.
Yeah, I think the insurers and certainly considering experience the legal world, it was disaster recovery.
Yeah,
disaster recovery exists. Disaster recovery we've known about for a long time. We've had the question marks to answer as to, do you want to buy this space in this empty office right now just in case, or, you know, have an option on it, and all of those things were discussed years and years before anybody started talking about a potential pandemic. I was in a fortunate position with an update of the IT system just before I moved on from the law firm, which meant that they moved on to a Citrix system, which meant, fortunately, the planning, and it was all built into our plans, was to ensure that there was a greater level of home working. But that was because of the trend. There was a trend towards more home working. There was a trend about moving more away from traditional office space into more flexible working environments. So all I was doing was really nothing genius about watching what the trends are doing and seeing what's happening. But fortunately, it fell right for the firm because the pandemic hit and everybody could work as if they were in the office, but at home and securely. But it's remarkable how many businesses didn't have that.
Yeah.
But it was a trend. I mean, it's easy to say that now and look very clever about it. It's not, you know, but I think that's actually flags why business planning is quite important. And it can resolve those sort of situations before they really hit home.
Well, and also allowing for the unexpected. I mean, it was a few weeks ago I saw on TV, it was I guess it must have been the 20th anniversary or something of the outbreak of mad cow disease.
Yeah. That's
you know, so, you know, if you were 20 years and 6 months ago, would you be sat there going, oh, we need a plan for mad cow disease? People will go, you're crazy. You'll be having an outbreak of that for, you know, 300 years or something.
Yeah.
You know, but it happened. And that does happen. You know, export bans get slapped on for, you know, people in, the Chinese government says, oh, we're not going to allow your technology in our country because, you're not abiding by our IT policies, which means that we've got to be able to look at everything that happens in our computer systems or whatever, 101 things, there can be a fallout between trading partners. There can be, like the many years ago, you'll remember the Tylenol health scare with Johnson & Johnson.
Yeah.
Some nutcases setting out to sort of poison people through taking headache tablets and so on. Stuff just happens, and I think the planning process sometimes it's so obsessed about, you have to know exactly the event that you're trying to deal with. And I would say that's completely wrong. You have to be light on your toes with plenty of options, and you have to work on the basis that mad stuff will just happen from time to time, and you just need to have thought about how you would handle it if it happened. Whether it's mad cow disease, 9/11, SARS, the Icelandic volcano, COVID, it doesn't matter what it is. All of those things had a major disruptive effect. And you couldn't have planned for the specific, but you could have planned for the general position of how do we operate in a very different environment if we had to.
Yeah, it's the business continuity that's first of all. I mean, I suppose I've had an advantage working in very sort of restrictive environments, basically restrictive in terms of the compliance is required to operate, and to have an accreditation that required you to be able to have certain things, which were, yes, it was tick box. But I always took the view that, and I think business should take the view that it's not just to do that so you can say that you've achieved that. It's actually, well, okay, I'm being asked to do this, and we're going to do it. We'll put the effort in. I might as well make it worth having it in the business. It's got to make sense. It's got to be realistic. I remember the floods in Newcastle. We had the storm, the supercell event, and the floods that occurred there. I mean, that nobody could have really predicted that. But parts of Gateshead, parts of Newcastle turned into that was a monsoon. Part were a river. Stuff happens, and one way to plan for it and to prepare for it is to look at a proper and effective business plan. Alastair, this has been superb. I mean, I think we could chat for another hour on this subject. And as they say, if anybody's playing David Lord's HReSource podcast hosting bingo, might have this one on your card. If you fail to plan, you plan to fail. You don't leave out the opportunity to be able to plan your business effectively. Right now is an excellent time to do it. I thoroughly recommend you checking out Alastair's book. Alastair, how can they find out about the book?
Well, it's on Amazon, of course, as is I think pretty much everything is these days. So if you search for how to build a better business plan, it'll take you right there. You can also get there from my website, thebetterbusinesscompany.com. You'll find it on there. And it does get occasional mentions on my Twitter feed, as we mentioned earlier on, which is at Finance DIR CFO, so short for Finance Director CFO, so at Finance DIR CFO, where it currently lives as a pinned tweet, should you need to find it.
There you go, pinned tweets. And finally, would you like to leave us with a piece of business advice that you've been given, or you've come across, or you might even have given, that you'd like to share with our audience?
Well, one of the favorite things I say a lot to people, and it's a quote. Although I've discovered more recently, it's not an exact quote, but it's close enough. Okay. Quote from Albert Einstein, and it's the thing that I come across a lot in my line of work, because I think sometimes people, instead of thinking through the problem, people just try and grab every bit of information they can and hope that somehow magically that'll sort out the issue.
Yeah.
And it's the quote goes, you have to remember that not everything that matters can be measured, and not everything that is measured matters.
Brilliant. I love it. And it's so true. Anybody that spent 5 minutes in business knows that can be very true. And brilliant. Alastair, this has been a wonderful, compared to the book is actually quite meaty. I think it's about 180 pages of value that people can have, and in addition, the download of the business template, which is business planning template, which you have available, and also links to be able to find you and the support that you can offer. Alastair Thomson, thank you very much for your time. It's been greatly appreciated.
My pleasure, David. Thank you.
Let's do it again. Thank you.